Hi, my name is Hannah Wolf, and I will be presenting a mini review on spinal muscular atrophy and the treatments. Before I get started, I want to discuss the reason why I chose to study this topic. About 15 years ago, my younger cousin passed away from SMA, or spinal muscular atrophy, before her first birthday, and I wanted to dive into the details of what SMA was and the different types and if there are any treatment options currently out there. So let me now dive right into what is SMA. Spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA, is an autosomal recessive disease resulting in degeneration of motor neurons in the spinal cord. SMA affects the central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, and voluntary muscle movements. This disorder is caused by a mutation in the gene encoding the survival motor neuron 1, or SMN1. This gene produces the survival motor neuron proteins, which protects and supports the longevity and health of motor neurons. Motor neurons, which are nerve cells in the brainstem and spinal cord, are destroyed in the progression of this disease. When this gene is altered, it is unable to produce proper levels of the SMN proteins needed to maintain muscle growth. And so that SMN1 gene is produced in an unaffected patients, and it produces the functional SMN protein, which allows muscles to develop and grow. And since there's a mutation in the SMN1 gene, SMA patients, they are unable to produce these functional proteins. But as you can see in this picture, there is also a backup gene known as SMN2. This gene has a structure similar to SMN1, but it does not produce a sufficient amount of SMN proteins to sustain motor neurons in the central nervous system. This means that they're unable to compensate for the degeneration of muscles due to the lack of SMN1 proteins. There are studies that I'll get into that focus on our SMN2 proteins, and they dive into that. I'll dive into that a little more later on. There are four main types of SMA. The first type 1, is the most severe, and type 4 is the least severe. So my cousin, she was diagnosed with type 1 SMA, and we discovered this within the first year of her life, and she passed away before her first birthday, so it makes sense that she falls in this category. So type 1 SMA, the age at onset is typically 0 to 6 months. They are never able to sit on their own or independently, and they normally die before the age of 2. Type 2 SMA, the age of onset is 7 to 18 months. Their highest function achieved is sitting, but they never end up knowing or learning how to stand, and they live greater than 2 years. Type 3 SMA, the age of onset is greater than 18 months. They are able to stand and walk, and they normally live to adulthood, but maybe in their adulthood they will need assistance from a wheelchair or like a walker to help them move around. Type 4 SMA, the age at onset is usually between the second or third decade of someone's life, and they're able to walk during adulthood. They also might need assistance, but their symptoms are not as severe. There have been many studies done regarding SMA and SMA treatment options, so I'm going to talk about 4 that I included in my review paper. The first is a study done by Chang et al., and this talks about the recovering capabilities of the SMN2 gene with sodium butyrate. And in this study, they used mice and they split them up into 3 groups depending on the symptoms, the SMA symptoms that they expressed. And they provided the sodium butyrate to certain groups, and what they found was that this solution was seen to increase the expression of exon 7 containing SMN protein from the SMN2 gene. So there were improvements in the motor functions in those mice, but more research must be done to see if these results from the study could be transferable and seen in humans, and if it's safe for human use. The next study that I looked into is from Faust et al. And this study looked at the self-complementary adeno-associated virus 9, which is SCAAV9, and they inserted this into mice with green fluorescent proteins on postnatal day 1 to replace the SMN protein that was lacking in the SMN patients, or in this case, mice. So the SCAAV9 SMN mice had a longer lifespan than the mice that were just given the green fluorescent protein treatment. But what needs to be known is that the SCAAV9 SMN treatment is ineffective if not given during early postnatal development. The next study is done by Mendel et al., and they provided intravenous adeno-associated virus to patients, and this held survival motor neurons, SMN, which was complementary DNA encoding the missing SMN protein seen in SMA patients. Patients with SMA type 1 reached further motor milestones than they would have without the treatment. So as I said before, type 1 patients are not able to sit on their own, and they typically die before the age of 2. But in this study, these patients were able to sit, roll, crawl, walk, and some were even able to speak. So the administration of the adeno-associated virus containing the DNA coding for SMN led to a longer survival, higher motor milestone achievements, and better motor function than past studies that have been done. But similar to the other research I've mentioned, more additional research has to be done to see the longitudinal effects on the patients that were involved in this study. The final research that I'll discuss is by Pechman et al., and this explores the effects of nusinersen on patients with SMA type 1. So nusinersen is known to increase SMN2 exon 7 by expressing more full-length and functional SMN proteins. So improvements were seen in patients' motor function, even in advanced stages of the disease. And additional follow-ups are needed to fully understand the potential for this drug as a SMA treatment. And the image in the bottom corner of this slide shows a patient, a young girl who was diagnosed with SMA type 1, and she needed this drug in order to survive, and fortunately she was able to receive this treatment through fundraising. So her motor skills have developed immensely, but the downside is that this treatment costs $125,000 per dose, and multiple doses are needed in order to see an effect from this drug. So there definitely have to be more research to see or find ways to lower the cost of this treatment so it's more accessible to people who have SMA. Even though there is no known cure for SMA, the research I've stated provides SMA patients with a potential treatment option and the possibility of living a longer and healthful life. Through more research, we will get closer and closer to finding a cure for SMA.